Hi, and welcome to my review of Shin Godzilla, or Godzilla Resurgence, as the Western name is. So, I just got back from watching this about an hour ago, and I thought I'd share my opinion on it and just kind of a general synopsis of what happens in the movie because a lot of people are curious and they're not able to watch it in the West. Oh, by the way, the video you're watching now is me taking a hike to one of the filming locations of the original 1954 Godzilla film. I'm lucky enough to live about 40 minutes away from it, and it's like this hidden path through the forest, and you end up on a beach where they did some filming. So I thought I'd just throw that up as a background as I talk. So before we get into any spoilers, I will say it's a good movie. It's very creative. It's a really interesting, different take on Godzilla that clearly reflects the first film in many ways. And yeah, overall, it's good. It takes a lot of chances with him, but I think Godzilla is at his best when he's being treated uniquely with each different installment. It keeps him fresh and interesting, and I think just he works that way. He's kind of this blank canvas that can be played with. So that's the non-spoiler thing. It's good. I recommend it. Go see it if you can. So now we'll get into spoilers and what actually goes down in the movie. So just at the very beginning, these, I guess they would be like the Coast Guard, Japanese Coast Guard, and they find this abandoned, just a small little private luxury boat. And it's empty, so they're on there and trying to figure out what's going on. And then I guess the boat gets sucked under. It's not super clear, but it gets messed up, and then there's a big explosion in the water. And then what looks like a bunch of blood basically comes up from the water, but it's not from the people because it's so much. So it's this giant red spot now floating in the water. And people are... Oh, and there's... nearby, there's one of the underground tunnels for cars, and you see the people in there, part of the tunnel's collapsing, and that same red blood stuff starts to pour in through the roof, mixed with mud and other things. And so these people are getting evacuated, and a bunch of government officials and I guess some scientists, they come in a bit later, but they all get together to discuss what's happening, and meanwhile people are, filming that spot because it's just a little bit out in the water. And so the government and the prime minister and everything are talking about this, and then a tail appears in the water. People don't realize it's a tail, they don't know what it is, but this giant thing is sticking out of the water, just kind of waving around and getting everybody's interest, and nobody knows what's going on. And then that whole mass starts making its way towards land and leaving this trail of this red blood behind it. And then it reaches land, and this kind of is very reminiscent, and I'm sure this is absolutely on purpose, of the 2011 tsunami. So you see just like boats and cars and things being washed forward further and further inland as this creature is taking sort of river paths and things like that, trying to move its way further and further inland. And it seems kind of small. You're like, I'm pretty sure Godzilla's supposed to be bigger than this. I'm not sure what's going on. But you can see his dorsal fins and stuff like that. And then finally we get a look at him, and at first I didn't think it was Godzilla. I thought it was a completely different kaiju or something, some other monster he was going to fight, because it has no front arms. Its face is very different. The eyes are a lot bigger. It's pushing itself forward with its hind legs, like rubbing its face and its chest across the ground, pushing itself forward. It's still got the big tail and everything. So I was like, oh, maybe this is another creature that's, the same species but different. I wasn't sure. But this thing keeps pushing itself forward more and more and more as it makes its way further into the city. And at some point it decides to stand up. It starts to evolve, I guess, or it's mutating, and it's able to stand up on its hind legs, and it's just kind of standing there out in the middle of the city. Now, all of this is within the first 15 minutes of the film, maybe the first 10 minutes or something. They get to the action pretty fast, which is nice. And it's all in broad daylight, so they're not hiding anything. So then the military decides to intervene. They send out some helicopters, and I believe they're about to fire at him, but there's some people that are too close to the area, so they hold back for just too long, and then for whatever reason, that little baby Godzilla thing heads towards the water, and it escapes before they can shoot it. So obviously everybody's freaking out over this and trying to figure out what's going on. Now, at this point, the movie focuses a lot on the government people and their decision making, and a lot of it just takes place in like a couple offices and a couple military rooms or government rooms. But it's shot very kinetically. There's some really creative filming in this. That's some like I don't even know how to put it, just weird shots, or they're cutting back and forth, or bizarre close-ups of the actors. It's actually visually kind of interesting, considering it's just people in a room talking back and forth. But it was kind of fun. Or sometimes they'll have a shot where like they're reading something on a laptop, and you're seeing the text of the laptop backwards, and the camera's pointed at the person, as if we are the screen of the computer. Just strange things like that. It's fun. It's interesting. And it kind of punches up what could otherwise have been very boring scenarios. So anyways, everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. Nobody has a clue. But then life seems to be going on normal in other parts of the city. I don't know why. That was kind of strange. Until this thing comes back. I'm not sure how many days later, but it does come back. And now it looks like proper Godzilla, the thing you've seen in the trailers. So it was definitely Godzilla, and it's just been evolving this whole time. And so now he has his arms, he's standing upright, he's much, much taller, and you see him out in the water coming towards the city, and this is when they're playing the original song from the 1954 film. It's not an updated version or anything like that. It's not some bad remix or something. This is the original song. It sounds great when it's put together with that. And that's another thing about this movie, is they have a lot of interesting visuals, or musical selection. There's some smooth jazz at one point. There's, I think they use about 3 or 4, at least 3 tracks from the original film, just straight up original audio. They use the original. When they first open the film and it shows the title, they use the original Godzilla roar, his big scream. So that was very nice, those throwbacks. But anyways, so Godzilla makes it inland, and nothing's stopping him. He's just kind of blindly walking forward. They do try to take some shots at him, and nothing is effective. They send in tanks and helicopters and things like this. He doesn't care. He doesn't even notice it, basically. They're dropping some smaller artillery on him, and they're shooting some rockets at him that do nothing. And there's some really cool destruction kind of sequences where there's just clouds of explosions all around his face where you can't even see him anymore, and then he just keeps going, and he's wrecking through buildings and all this. The camera work is nice. It's often kept either low and looking up at him from a perspective, or it's big wide shots in the middle of the day, just seeing this Godzilla walking through everything. It's really nice. There's no bad obscured shots or shaky cam that you can't quite see, or it's too dark. That was something that a lot of people had problems with in the 2014 film. And so they definitely did the opposite of that, and you see a lot of Godzilla in this all the time. So this is going on until they decide that they're going to fly overhead and drop some much bigger artillery on him, some actual bombs, and these do some damage. They land right on his back, and they kind of blow open his back, and you see all this blood pour down. You're looking up at the camera's looking up as his blood pours down from him, and this doesn't make him happy. This is the first time he takes any real damage, and so I don't know if this was in any trailers, but normally his skin is glowing kind of red in between the cracks and along his back. So this starts to change color into like a purpley pink and then a blue. And he starts to open his mouth, and you can see that glow happening. But I think in the trailers, this is where they cut. But if you get to see what happens next. His lower jaw splits open, and his mouth goes almost flat, like it opens so much, and then that lower jaw splits open in a weird alien kind of way. And he aims straight down, and his blast basically burns down at the ground and spreads out, and it just decimates that area of the city. It's just fire going through all the streets and insane destruction. It's like a nuclear bomb dropped. He's just wiping out everything around him. And then that blast kind of focuses more, and it turns into a laser, which he aims up, and he cuts in half the airplane that dropped the bomb on him. And at this point, it's just like, oh my god, this Godzilla is super powerful. He's crazy. And then more bombers start flying overhead because they're like, okay, it worked the first time, let's do it again. And I forget if they land any more bombs. I think he intercepts it before it happens, but the way he does that is he's now like shut off his mouth laser blast, and he just kind of hunches over, and then all these lasers shoot out of his back from like his dorsal area. And there's maybe 8 to 10 of these lasers, and they just kind of like a porcupine, they just shoot out in every direction, and it's just a solid continuous beam in all these directions, these thin blue lasers. And they destroy the planes above, but he's wiping out all the buildings around him for miles, and he's using his mouth laser blast again, and just everything's getting cut in half and sliced in half, and he's just destroying everything. It's the wildest Godzilla attack I've ever seen. And so between his fire breathing and these laser blasts, he decimates the whole area around him. And then he starts to cool down, and he just kind of goes to sleep, standing up. Those glowing cracks stop glowing. He's just kind of gray and still. And then I'm not sure how many days he's like that, but he seems to be like that for a while. And that's when we're back with the people trying to figure out a plan, how to deal with this. And there's this one girl, I forget her name, but she's a Japanese actor. She's in the trailer, but I guess she has her connections with America, like she's from America or something. And so they're trying to work now with Americans. They want to work together to contain this threat. But then we later learn that China and Russia also want to kind of step in and take control of that. They don't want Japan and America to have this thing at their disposal. Not that they can control it, but... So there's this kind of politics going on, as well as the scientists trying to figure things out. I will mention at this point, one of the scientists they bring in is Shinya Tsukamoto. He's a director who did Tetsuo the Iron Man, which is a really great, at the time, it was this independent film that he made, and it kind of made him famous. And it's a really cool movie, so I recommend you go watch that. But anyways, he's in it as one of the scientists and a bunch of people. So let's see. So they're dealing with all that for a while, and it eventually comes to a point where they say, okay, Japan, you have to solve this, or else we're going to send in nukes and we're going to blow up Tokyo. So Tokyo is evacuated. There's like thousands of buses, these big like tour buses that they're taking everybody out in. They're taking them on ships. They're taking them on helicopters, everything. Meanwhile, Godzilla's just kind of sleeping there. And I think they've got a week or 2 weeks is the time limit before Tokyo gets nuked. America or whoever decides that's what's going to happen. So these guys are desperately trying to come up with a plan how to deal with this. And at one point, because he got his back blown up, they got some of his DNA, and they find out he's asexual. And they figure out that at some point they figure out that he's coming to the city to get the radiation. They were looking at his trails and that all the radiation's coming off of him, and they discover that he actually, underwater, I'm not sure, it might have been because of the 2011 tsunami and earthquake, or I'm not sure if it was related to that or not, but basically he found a bunch of nuclear containers, and whatever he was beforehand, he was eating that, and this is what's caused him to grow and turn into this thing. So anyways, they do come up with a plan where they decide that they're going to use some kind of like nitrogen stuff to freeze him, basically. but they have to get it into his mouth. And so I think he's still asleep at this point, and they've loaded up some trains, some Shinkansen trains, because he's right on top of the train line. And to start this attack, they send 2 of these bullet trains right at him, and they just explode. And then they have set detonations in the buildings around him, so the buildings are falling on top of him. And then while he's trapped under the rubble, they try to move in these vehicles that are sticking these tubes basically in his mouth, trying to fill him with this nitrogen. But he shoots his breath and he blasts those away, and he gets up and keeps going. And then they send in like more smaller trains up, like, I don't know, half a dozen trains all at once, blowing up around him. And then they're sending in helicopters and tanks and all this stuff, just trying to get him to fall down. And they fly overhead, and he's using his back beams again and all of this. And then finally they get him to fall down again, and they get those things in his mouth, and they get, I guess, enough of it in, but he bites onto them and throws them away. He gets up again, and you think, oh, okay, he's fine, but he starts to do his charge, and then he instantly freezes across his whole body. And that's it. He's been frozen. I guess his blood cells and everything have all been frozen by this nitrogen stuff. It might not have been nitrogen. I forget exactly what. But it stops him. And then they kind of are wrapping up stuff in the movie, and just with this giant Godzilla sitting in the middle of the city around all this destruction. And the very final shot in the movie is it pans up his tail, and at the very, very tip, he's got that weird tip of a tail. There's like half Godzilla, half human things that are kind of growing and spreading out of his tail. It's really bizarre. It looks like kind of people, but they've got Godzilla mouths and Godzilla dorsal spines. And I don't think they explain anything about that in the movie. It's just kind of this weird final shot. And I'm not sure what the implication is there. I think it's kind of showing like, oh, we have brought this on ourselves and we are killing ourselves, a message about the nuclear stuff. But maybe there's some other meaning there. But they didn't seem to mention that in the movie at any point up to them. And that was the very first time and only time we saw it. And there was no mention of it anywhere else. So I'm not sure if they're implying he came from us. Was he? I don't know. It was very ambiguous there. It's kind of interesting, though. So, let's see. We talked about the music, the acting. It was fine. Very typical Japanese acting that you'd see in most movies. Nothing amazing and nothing too bad either. There was some English speaking in it that was pretty rough, which was kind of funny, but that's fine. Whatever. The CG was pretty good. It wasn't up to the standard of the, the 2014 one looked more realistic, but I don't mind that. I'm used to that kind of Japanese CG, and it wasn't bad. I'm not saying it was bad. It wasn't distracting. It wasn't awkward or anything. It was just not as realistic as, Hollywood budgets can afford. For me, it was no problem at all. And some of the destruction actually looked really, really great. And it was visually very fun. And so most of the movie, I loved it. It was really great, really creative, really interesting. Except the ending, I felt like Godzilla didn't really get a big showdown of any kind. Like, at that point, like halfway through when he just destroys everything around him and half the city, I felt like something like that would have been better towards the end, just to really show his power. But the way he dies, it's a little pathetic almost. Like, I guess you feel bad for him, but I just felt like he went down too easy in kind of a silly way, like a silly plan, sticking these tubes in his mouth and freezing him. I don't know. It didn't really do it for me, but the rest of the film was great. It was a lot of fun, and it was a very creative take on Godzilla. And I guess that's it. I can't really think of anything else to add. If you have any questions about it, I know this is kind of rambly, but it's just off the top of my head here. If you have any questions, leave them in a comment below, and I'll try my best to answer them. But yeah, I do recommend it. It's fun, and if you enjoy the more bizarre, darker Godzilla from the original and from the, I think it was the late 80s version where they made him more serious in those movies, you'll enjoy this one. He's back to being a force of nature that just destroys things and plows through things and is unstoppable. Well, apparently not. He dies in this. I think he's dead. There was no hint that he was alive. But in the original 1954 film, he clearly dies at the end of that too. So I'm okay with that, I guess. I would have liked to have seen him live, or at least die in a more spectacular way, but whatever. It's okay. So yeah, thanks for watching, and talk to you next time. Bye-bye.